With that, I want to introduce our event for today. Again, many people have no idea once they're finished with their PhDs and postdoc, what are some careers available that are not just your typical academia or go to industry. So Dr. Rodriguez, she's a medical science liaison, and she will talk to us a little bit about what that is and how do you get to be one. So to give you a little bit of background on her, she got her bachelor's degree in chemistry from Texas A&M, and then she got her PharmD from UT Austin. And as soon as she graduated with that, she has been gainfully employed, I noticed. So she started as a pharmacy resident at Houston Methodist. Soon after that was over, she became a clinical pharmacist at MD Anderson. So she actually worked in the area for, I think, the longest period of time, about 6 or 7 years. Then she became a clinical pharmacy specialist at Harris Health System. And just 2015, she obtained her medical science liaison. She got that job at Takeda Oncology. And that's what she's doing right now. And I prepare some questions for her that she can answer. In addition to doing all those great things, she's also a mom. So I wanted her to talk a little bit about work-life balance. So she will walk through these things, and then when she's done, I'm sure you guys will have lots of questions. I'll be in the back with a microphone. So raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone to you. And with that, here's Sarah.
Thank you.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry, photographer.
Sorry. Hold on, we have this
paparazzi.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Do you need water?
I've got some.
Okay, cool.
So I'm familiar with the feeling of what the heck am I going to do with my doctorate. I tried to find that niche in pharmacy where I felt like I wasn't working at Walgreens, doing fast food kind of pharmacy. So I ended up in clinical pharmacy and now in this. So I totally get trying to figure out what the heck you're going to do after all that school. So what is an MSL is a question that I answer a lot. I answer it for my mom, my dad. I try to explain to them what I do every day. And essentially most people, when you think of industry and you think of people that come to your physician's office, you're thinking of the salesperson. So my role is a little different from that. The people who, if you're speaking about Takeda Oncology, the people who direct the company medically are in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So they obviously cannot visit with every physician across the country that wants to do research with their drug. So that's what I'm here for. I'm here to provide scientific support and visit with what we call key opinion leaders, which are essentially clinicians of some sort or maybe researchers who have an interest in working with our products. There are caveats, of course, and every MSL role is a little bit different, and that line between sales and medical can be in different places. In my case, it's very divided. I'm purely medical. They try to keep us very separated, so I don't have to go in and sell anything. I just get to go and talk science with people. We'll talk about how I became an MSL, but as far as typical duties, that also kind of helps answer that question of what exactly an MSL is and what we do. Again, it's going to vary from company to company. So a lot of the things I do, the first one is my company has FDA approved products that are marketed. And a salesperson can go in and they can talk about what's in the package insert, and they're limited by what's on that piece of paper. I don't have quite the same limitations. So I'm in a very reactive role. So somebody's gone to visit with a physician, they've asked something that's off the package insert, that's when I'd be called in to talk about a marketed product. So maybe they want to dive more into what the patients were like on the trial. They want to ask some questions about other medications we gave that didn't make it into the package insert, that's when I make it there. And as long as I'm telling them I'm talking off the package insert, I can provide that information. One of the products I support is called Exazimib. It's in combination with Revlimid and dexamethasone for multiple myeloma patients. So maybe I get called in to talk about other combinations. We have data with cyclophosphamide, we have data with whatever else. Then outside of those marketed products, every pharmaceutical company is going to have something in the pipeline, all the way from it's still at the bench, or it's all the way to a phase 3 trial. So I'm able to answer questions about those products, provide information, and then also support any clinical trials that are ongoing. And there's two types of trials, that I can be called in to support. The first one would be something that the company's initiated, and then the second one would be something that one of the KOLs in my territory has an interest in a product. They have an idea, they want to work with it. So I would take that idea and bring it to the company and do everything from presenting it to going through all the paperwork portion of things and to supporting the trial and that investigator while the study was ongoing. Other than that, I have a lot of educational pieces to my role. So I would be called in maybe to go to some of the sales events, to talk about a publication, to talk about the things the salespeople need to know and help them understand the disease or the drug a little better. And then I might also get called in to do something similar for physicians or nurses, something along those lines. I attend a lot of conferences, so I might be educating people in a booth setting, which is not my favorite, but it's just part of the deal. How did I become an MSL? So probably you all noticed the very short job kind of in the middle of my resume. I was a clinical pharmacist here, as Lori mentioned, on lymphoma myeloma for 7 years. And I had twins. They're 4 years old now, but at the time, I just couldn't keep up with my physician's schedules anymore. And I tried to figure out how the heck I was going to survive doing what I loved and keeping up with my family at the same time. So I started looking at some other things, and I found an administrative position working on the P&T committee for Harris Health System. And I got there, and things didn't pan out like I had hoped. And I actually called a friend to say, hey, do you think MD Anderson would take me back? And she said, well, I'm not sure about that, but I got this email from a recruiter. You should at least look at it. And it ended up being for Takeda Oncology, and their main marketed products were for multiple myeloma. So that was the group I worked in at MD Anderson. Their main interest was getting into that group. So I was able to leverage mostly my relationships and my knowledge of the disease state and obtain the role after a long series of interviews. So it was a little serendipitous, and it wasn't a role that I had looked really hard at before, because as I said, I was really looking for more work-life balance, and my impression of the MSL role at that time was that you were a road warrior, and I didn't feel like that was something that I could keep up with. What is my typical schedule? That varies from day to day. The nice part about being an MSL is that I make my own schedule. So I have certain physicians I need to meet with. I set up appointments. I have set meetings because the main part of the company is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm doing a lot of virtual meetings, a lot of WebEx calls, things along those lines. And then I have certain conferences, as I mentioned, that I'm attending. So my day-to-day really looks different. It just depends on what's going on at the time, who I need to talk to. So it's a role with a lot of flexibility. I tried to come up with things that maybe you guys should consider if you're thinking about this type of role. How many of you are PhDs or PhD candidates? Okay. So as I keep mentioning, an MSL role is really different depending on where you are. So if you're wanting to talk to somebody about this type of role, be sure to clarify what exactly they're looking for. Because if sales isn't your thing, you're going into this kind of position wanting to talk science, that, as I said, that line can vary depending on who you're talking to. It's a very highly regulated industry. which was a huge adjustment for me. As a clinical pharmacist, I was used to saying, well, here's the situation and here's what we do. And, now I'm not allowed to have those kind of conversations. You're having to adjust the way you think and the way you talk to people about things pretty significantly. I can present data, but I can't draw conclusions for people. So if you're not a rule follower, maybe not the place to be. You'll get, anytime you start with the company, you get like a 3-day course on how many ways you can go to jail or get fined. So, if that makes you uncomfortable, probably not the best place. Smaller companies with earlier products are usually the ones, if you're looking to come straight from a PhD role or from, a clinical position like I did, smaller companies with earlier products are usually the ones that are going to want to talk to you a little bit more than a AstraZeneca or a Celgene or whatever else. That has some things that come along with it. So smaller companies tend to have smaller teams. So that may mean that you're covering a larger area. So this is a job that will involve travel. And even if you're me, so my territory is Houston. And you would think, oh, I never go anywhere. I live in Houston, no problem. So you're the only person in your territory. So if you need to train with somebody, you have to leave. If you have a company meeting, you have to leave. If you have a conference, you have to leave. So if those things are difficult for you and you don't feel like, if you're like me and you have children and you feel like that'd be really hard for you to arrange, it's probably, you're not going to be able to find an MSL role where you never go anywhere, unfortunately. And then if I want to become an MSL, what should I do? So this is a really, really hard question to answer. Networking is number one. You'll hear that from people all the time. So maybe in your current position, you see some industry professionals, whether that's an MSL or a salesperson. I would tell everybody that you meet that this is what you want to do. Because you never know when that person has the opportunity and thinks, oh, hey, so-and-so in that lab really wants to move into this kind of role. I think their research applies. They'd be a good fit. So get to know everybody that you come in contact with. If you have researchers or physicians that you work with often that could introduce you or take you to some of these company meetings, that'd be a really great way to get to know people. It's all about exposure. LinkedIn. So there are a lot of very, very active MSL recruiters on LinkedIn. There are groups you can join. I give a link for one of them that has a lot of suggestions on what to do and how to talk to companies and things like that. So I'll give that. The first question anybody is going to ask you is why you want to be an MSL and what you think an MSL does. So have that prepared in your mind, because every single person you come in contact with is going to ask you that set of questions. I can tell you I had like 7 interviews for this job and it came up every single one. Why do you think your experience is applicable? So do you have a research project that really makes you a good fit for a certain company? Have you been working with a particular group and you have a network that you can leverage in this kind of position? Let's see. If you're not comfortable, you will do a lot of public speaking. So maybe you go and join your Toastmasters or participate in career events that allow you to develop those public speaking skills, because the interview will involve it, and then you're sitting in front, you're presenting all the time. And then I would advise you to be very patient, because it's a hard role to break into. And some people are like me and they fall into it and it just sort of happens, and some people look for a long time. So if it's something you're really interested in, just hang in there. It'll happen. Just keep meeting people and keep trying. And then this is kind of entertaining about work-life balance. So as I mentioned a couple of times, I have 4-year-old twins, and the main thing for me was I really loved being a clinical pharmacist. I loved working with patients. It really drove me. It was my passion. But at some point, I had to make a choice. And for me, it was moving to something where I had a little more flexibility and choosing to maybe give up some of those things to find work-life balance. So while I don't get to deal with patients every day anymore, I get to affect a lot of patients all at once by dealing with these physicians and helping them conduct their trials. I also have to give a shout out, even though he's not here, but Lori's here, so maybe she'll tell him, to my husband. We work really, really, really hard to coordinate, and it's tough to balance having a family and both of us having careers. So we have we put things on each other's Outlook calendars and things like that when we're traveling, what we're doing, who's picking up who when. So finding family support and admitting that you need help with some things is really a good idea if you're somebody that, is starting this and already have a family to deal with. And then I would say that the flexibility of the role, sometimes like this weekend, I'm going to SWOG, so I'm working all weekend. So the flexibility allows me to, maybe I only work a half day on Monday, which is really nice, where you can get that kind of R&R that you need after a long weekend. So it's good to have that ability to kind of adjust your schedule as needed and rest when you can. So as far as prepared comments, that's what I have. And I've given you guys a couple of links. The first one is for the MSL Society. So the MSL Society has a lot of resources. They've got some recruiters that work through that group, so you can meet some people that way. They also offer a training program. I can't vouch for that training program, but they do have speaker training, all sorts of things that you could look at. It's a lot of great resources. TMAC Direct, Michael Petrak runs this group. He is actually the recruiter that helped me get my job. The reason I put his group on here is he has a lot of great video blogs where he talks about how to discuss how you fit into a company, highlighting your experience, interviewing techniques, things along those lines that would be very helpful if you were looking at one of these kinds of roles. And then at the bottom, I've given you my personal email. So if you have further questions after we finish the Q&A, you don't want to talk in front of the group, whatever else, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you where I can. And with that, I'm happy to take whatever questions you have.
Whoever has a question, I need to give you the mic so I can give you
Hi. So I just had a question. I'm a postdoc in basic science, and I have no clinical experience. Is it absolutely essential that you gain clinical experience before you apply to be an MSL?
I don't think so, no. Depending on the company, they have a different balance between PhDs and PharmDs and advanced practice nurses, things like that. It's actually really nice to have people that are coming from the basic science kind of things, because we all help each other. So the PhDs have skill sets that I don't have, and I have skill sets that they don't have, and we all help. Some companies tend more towards one or the other, but I don't think clinical experience is absolutely necessary. Mm-hmm.
Two questions. The first one is, related to the same question. Basic research has also different levels, and the research I'm doing is mostly doesn't have the immediate disease relation. Maybe in the future, but I don't, we don't know that yet. So still, is it gonna work? The second question is, what are the, are you gonna stay as an MSL all your life? So what are the, next coming opportunities you can take in the future to grow in your career?
Sure. The first question is a little hard for me to answer. In that case, if you don't feel like your research is applicable, maybe you have techniques that could apply to other areas. Maybe you have a physician network that you've worked with extensively and you can leverage those relationships. I don't think it's absolutely necessary for your research to equal drug development. A lot of this is just knowing how to interpret the data, so you have those skills. Secondly, do I want to be an MSL all my life? I'm not sure. So most pharmaceutical companies are based in other places. They're not in Houston. And right now my life keeps me in Houston. This is where I want to be. if I did decide to move forward, there are people that have done so. Since I've been with the company and it's less than 2 years, we had somebody take over as the director for a large registry project. We also had somebody, we recently bought out another company, and he was part of that transition team and part of the business development team. So he's moved into that role. So there are opportunities to do other things if you want to. Some people enjoy being an MSL forever, but I think there would be other places to go if I did make that decision.
I'll get you.
You said that,
It'll turn to take a few seconds.
oh, okay. Yeah, you said you had 7 interviews. Could you talk a little bit more about the interview process to get your job?
Oh, sure. So there were a lot of hoops to jump through. So the first interview was really with the recruiter. I had to explain to him why, again, what I thought an MSL did, and why I thought my experience was applicable, and why the company should take a chance on me, what I had that other people didn't have. The next interview was with HR. So again, answering very similar questions, talking about what drove me, why I wanted to work there, why I thought it was a good fit for the company, what I liked about it. Then my now manager called me on the phone to talk to me. Then she came down to Houston to talk to me again. And then I went through the in-person interview process, which was, I had to fly to Boston. I had interviews with, oh my gosh, I can't even remember how many people. I had separate interviews, and then I gave a presentation at the end. I had one with the MSL director, one with HR again, one with another MSL, a medical director, and the vice president. So it was pretty extensive. And I kept, you keep going, well, I won't make it to the next round. So it takes a really long time. And again, you have to be very patient because it's definitely a process.
I'll get you, then I'll get you guys. You want it.
What was your most satisfying moment to date working in your position? And 2, do you absolutely have to have a PhD?
You definitely don't have to have a PhD. I'm a PharmD. And as I said, there are some people with background in nursing. We have somebody on our team that has a master's in statistics. We have a couple of people that came all the way from research within Takeda all the way into an MSL position. I think a doctorate is becoming kind of the norm, whether that's in a more of a clinical space or a PhD space, but it's not impossible. The most satisfying thing to date, oh gosh. So I started with Takeda in September, and we launched a brand new drug in November. And so I was brand new MSL, and the person who was training me quit right before the drug launched. So I was a new MSL covering MD Anderson, all of this, and honestly, just getting through it and feeling like I did a decent job was my biggest. I was really proud of myself because people would talk to me in abbreviations. I didn't even know who they were talking about, who I was supposed to go to, what I was supposed to do. So I was pretty proud, honestly, just figuring out and learning how to swim in shark-infested water. So.
Hi. Thanks for coming out today. So my first question is, so there are a lot of MSL posts or job positions that require you to have a year or 3 years of MSL experience. How seriously should we take that, especially if you're going from research into industry? And then the second question is just to piggyback on that gentleman's question earlier. So the trajectory in terms of being an MSL, there are different levels, so MSL 1, 2, et cetera. And how long do you have to stay in each level? Or, I mean, do you have to stay in each level for X number of years prior to graduating to a next level? If you could just explain that, that would be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first question, how seriously should you take it? It depends on the company. I'm trying to think, the post that I responded to kind of vaguely mentioned that you should probably have industry experience, but again, it was a little more vague. It didn't give a specified number of years. It all depends on what you can leverage. Like for me, knowing all the physicians in the department that they wanted to target, they didn't care as much about the experience. But again, it's company specific. So probably what I would do in that case is reach out, if there's a recruiter with that position, I reach out and explain to them why you're still a good fit, even though you don't have the experience. Or even directly to the company. You can reach out to the MSL for the area, to the salesperson, anyone else, and explain why that doesn't matter in your case. You can try to get around it. As I said before, some of the smaller companies are a little more willing to take on somebody that doesn't have experience. And once you have that year under your belt, you have a lot more options. As far as levels of MSL, this is something that I have not entirely figured out yet either. So within my company, there's MSL, senior MSL, and then executive MSL. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of difference, honestly, in the responsibilities between an MSL and a senior MSL, to be quite honest. An executive is taking on some larger projects. They might be the head of a certain molecule. So they're coordinating a number of meetings. They're participating in maybe pre-reviews of different concepts, things that I would not be included in. I think a lot of it is pay and the number of projects that you're taking on top of your normal responsibilities. Depending on the company, that could be different. There are some that the title indicates whether or not they're involved with pipeline or commercial products. It would just depend on who you're talking to, honestly. I think a lot of it's semantics, honestly.
Hi, thank you for your presentation and for coming here. Two questions also. First question is related to kind of earlier ones. What do most MSLs who aren't career MSLs go on to do after their position as MSL? And then also, how are you evaluated? What are the performance metrics? What's your boss look like to see that you're doing well?
Sure. Again, there's a number of different things. It depends on your willingness to move from a field-based position to something in the company. MSLs have gone on to go to the home office and be a director of a certain study. Maybe they move. So within my company, there's medical affairs, which is the group I work in, and then there's clinical, which is dealing with company-sponsored studies. Maybe they move into being a director over a certain study. Like I said, my coworker Eric moved into more of a transition role and working on integrating two companies. I've known people that have done more business development where they're going and maybe we're going to ASH or ASCO, some of these large conferences, and scouting for possible things that the company might be interested in taking on. Going into more of an educational role because, there are salespeople and MSLs to train. So those would all be options. A lot of companies are moving more towards a model where they're forming alliances with certain hospital systems. So maybe you're heading an alliance. That would also be a possibility. Yeah. Did I answer both? I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You guys have a lot of questions. It's okay. It's different based on a lot. First of all, in the company, I'm sorry to keep repeating that, but different companies have different standards. You may hear the term metrics. Some companies have a metric for how many physicians that you see in a month or a year. Mine doesn't have that. A lot of how I'm evaluated is based on my manager's knowledge of my territory. So because I have MD Anderson in my territory, for instance, I have 20-something studies that I've got ongoing right now that I'm helping to support. So that's very different from somebody who's covering Oklahoma and Nebraska and some of these states where you don't have this huge academic medical center. Maybe they've only got a couple of studies in their territory. So you can't really evaluate people the same way. So maybe that person takes on more projects and that's what they're evaluated on. It's a hard question to answer. It depends on the situation.
Thank you for sharing the experience. You mentioned that your MSL role is very separated from a sales role, and I'm wondering if you have to teamwork with sales from time to time. And along the same line, I'm wondering, as a medical liaison, what groups of expertise within the company do you really interact with, and what the interactions are like?
Sure.
Thank you.
So as far as sales, as I said, we're very separated at my company. I deal with them outside of an environment where I'd see KOLs. So if we were in the same room and we both wanted to talk to a physician, the salesperson would be asked to leave if the KOL and I were having a conversation, just to keep things very separated. Outside of an environment where we're together with KOLs, the salespeople might call to ask me questions about the package insert or a study to understand something. We do some training for their groups, but there's definitely a divide. We would never be in an office together, if that answers your question. Who do I interact with? Most of my interactions are within medical affairs. So in the home office, there are people that deal with the operational aspects of clinical trials. They're called clinical research associates. So I deal with them a lot. We kind of tag team issues together. I deal with our medical directors a lot. And the interactions are really great, honestly. They're very open. I have the guy for Exazimib in the rest of the U.S., I have his cell phone number. We talk all the time, and it's a pretty open relationship. Would I call up the vice president? Probably not, but he knows who I am and I know who he is, and we do talk in meetings and things like that. I'm really satisfied, honestly, with the size of the company. It's kind of a mid-sized pharmaceutical company, and I have the ability to interact with a lot of different people. So.
Showing up over here. My question is, my question is basically, are the MSL jobs only limited to pharmaceutical industries, or are there any other different types of industries that also look for MSL positions or something? Or people with the background who, other than pharmacology or something, are they also hired for the position of MSL?
Yeah, definitely. It would just depend on what your area of expertise was, but I don't think there's a restriction, honestly, on where you come from. As I said, I think it's becoming more the norm that you at least have a doctorate, but it doesn't have to be in pharmaceuticals by any means.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Quick question. In terms of the majority of the people in the group are coming from the scientific background with most likely PhD trainings in here or on the way to that. And could you maybe give us some pointers on the types of experiences that one should include on their CV? So essentially those CVs are already built. And what are maybe some keywords, buzzwords that will catch the eyes of those recruiting for MSL positions, such that you're not entering into that space with RT-PCR experience, Western blot, all these very scientific in our field words and techniques. Could you give us some idea of the types of things that people can highlight on their CV that would make them more attractive to this position?
Let me think about that for a moment. I would highlight definitely educational roles. So if you have, if you're going over to the College of Pharmacy or to the medical school and giving lectures, I would highlight that you're really involved in educating people because that's an important part of this role. I would probably highlight speaking experience as well. As far as the research portion of things goes, maybe the pathways that you're working with, who you're working with would be very important, and what their background is and what you've worked with them on. Showing off that kind of network that you have. That's a really important thing. I think most people can dig through the technical pieces of things, but it definitely put those things on there, but kind of highlight how that's applicable to this kind of role, if that makes sense. Is there a way that you see your research could be applicable to a pathway that this company is working on? Something like that.
Pretty loud. I don't know that I really.
Right there.
Hi, thanks again for being here tonight. I'm wondering if you can elaborate on some of the differences between a very small company versus a more of a mid-sized company like you are with right now, and some of the larger pharma companies, and the differences between the MSL roles at the three, and maybe some of the benefits and the drawbacks of the three.
Absolutely. So a small company might have, I know people who have worked for a company that has 35, 40 employees. So in that situation, somebody asked me about relationships in between me and, the president, the vice president, the director. It'd be very easy in that situation to get to know everybody involved. You'd also, because there weren't that many people, you'd be able to take on things that maybe I wouldn't have the opportunity to in a mid or larger size company. You're going to be kind of doing a little bit of everything. There's also less red tape in a small company. So for a study to get through my company, it has to go through a series of committees, and the lawyers have to go over it, and the IP people have to go over it, and all those things. You might not have quite as many barriers in a small company. A medium-sized company, but the drawbacks would be, so in a smaller company, first of all, you would be potentially bought out by a larger one. So in those sorts of situations, people do get laid off. So that's just the nature of the beast. They don't have as much money to fund research. And you've got a company that maybe they only have one or two things in their pipeline, and if neither one pans out, because a lot of things are not going to, honestly, that could put the company in jeopardy. A medium-sized company would have more resources, more funds, honestly, and more experience typically. But there would be still that kind of open door policy where you could reach people that were several levels above you. But again, more red tape, more definition to the role. So you'd have people that were responsible for certain things that you might not get to take on, like you might in a small company. And then in a large company, again, it's just going to be a lot more hoops, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry. And then again, you can have a even further division in the MSL role. So maybe you have somebody that just does education for commercial products. They don't get to do anything with pipeline. So if you really wanted to be involved in research, you wouldn't get to do those things. So.
So I have two questions. Thank you so much for your talk, by the way. The first one is how competitive you think MSL job market is compared to the other job markets for PhD scientists. For example, if someone wants to get a faculty position, they say usually tens, no matter how large the school is, tens to hundreds of applicants you receive for just one opening. So how many applicants, for example, you receive for an open MSL position in your company tens, a few, hundreds? So that was my first question. If you Google MSL salary Houston, Glassdoor reports the median salary is 144. How close to true is that? Two questions. Thank you.
Okay, good question. Honestly, it's a very competitive market. It's a position that a lot of people are looking at because of that flexibility and because it's, that's a nice salary range. So I think for our positions, we got hundreds of applications. So it's all about standing out because of those things that we keep highlighting. How am I unique from everyone else? What do I have to offer? And also getting a recruiter involved doesn't hurt things. Just because they can sell you and you get past that HR electronic screening of CV portion of things that, honestly, if you don't have that one certain word, you're not going to make it through that round. Knowing somebody within the company also helps get you to the top of that pile. As far as Glassdoor goes, it would depend on the therapeutic area that you're working in and the area that you're working in. In Houston, because of the size and reputation of the institutions here, that would be a fairly accurate starting salary.
So you just mentioned to get a recruiter involved. What can you tell us what that actually means?
Oh, sure. So, there are a lot of recruiters that specialize in MSL positions or medical director positions. So you could seek those people out on LinkedIn. Like I highlighted, TMAC Direct is the company I was hired through. So getting a hold of that recruiter that is selling that position, because Michael's putting everything up on his website. You can see what's available. And giving him your spiel about why you are passionate about being an MSL and why you're the perfect fit. And he is your spokesperson to the company. He's got a direct line to the hiring manager. So getting to know as many of those people and asking them if you could talk to them. Most of them will spend an hour on the phone with you if you want to talk about MSL positions.
You briefly mentioned about restrictions or regulations in bringing your opinion or coming to conclusions, drawing conclusions when you're interacting with the medical professionals. So how much scientific input could you bring to the table, either interacting back with your company or with the clinicians that you're dealing with?
It depends on the situation. So when you're talking about investigator-initiated studies, you have to be very careful because you can't put in much of any input, honestly. The investigator has to initiate the proposal. It comes through the company, and the company could give them feedback about safety, about dosing, things like that. But we aren't able to define what's done in the study. I am involved in those scientific discussions in the company level. If you're dealing with more of an alliance situation where both parties are able to provide input, you could have a lot more scientific input there. But I'm not allowed to influence an investigator-initiated study very much. Company-sponsored trials, the company is dictating what happens.
Okay. Another question. In terms of interacting and identifying these key opinion leaders, the KOLs, do you actively go out or read the literature and find out what lab has developed what that might be of interest to the company, or do you serve essentially as someone that the company says, we have an interest in this particular group, go talk to them? So essentially, do you do the active looking, or are you given these contacts to then go and reach out to?
So my role in a way is very reactive. So I identify a group through, ASH or ASCO. I might go around and visit with people from Houston and say, hey, I think this is really interesting. We should look at it. But for the most part, it's who contacts me. And that part of that is the regulations on the industry. I'm not allowed to go out and actively recruit, studies and research. So I'd have to be very careful about proactively visiting people that haven't expressed an interest in visiting with me.
Network with these people in order to then establish relationships, and if they express an interest, then they will contact you. So you do some networking in hopes to harness that kind of outcome, essentially.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. But I can't go in and be like, I can't go into somebody's office and say, here are all the wonderful things I have. Would you like to do research with them? You just have to be very careful about how those conversations are initiated and who does.
But essentially, when you do communicate, they're bound to ask you, so what is your company interested in? I mean, because that's going to be the one line of common interest that exists between the two of you. So at that point, can you share? Are you at liberty to share anything that will then perhaps cultivate a potential relationship? Or
Absolutely.
Okay.
So somebody asked, what are the things your company is working on? I have a slide deck that shows off our pipeline. I might explain all the things that we have available. I said, what do you like to do research in? What are you working on actively? Do any of these things interest you at all? Since all my clinical experience was at MD Anderson, I had to go into a lot of other facilities and introduce myself. So it's just asking a lot of questions about what do you do? What are you working on? Where are your areas of interest? How can I help you? What are your research program abilities? Those kinds of things. And naturally, just some of these conversations evolve. People love to talk about themselves, so.
So I have another question.
Sure.
For the record, for those grad students who will be watching this, I just ask this question for them and the existing grad students. If a grad student has a solid career planning, collecting all the evidences necessary for the skills you mentioned, like communication skills, presentation skills, teaching, mentoring, and etc., for an MSL position, then it's not necessary to do a postdoc. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
That's a good question. A lot of the people I know that are PhDs did do a postdoc, but I don't know that it would necessarily be a requirement. It would depend on the situation in the company. But most people have done a postdoc.
Yes, so I think the reason so many postdocs do postdoc is because they haven't thought it through what career planning they needed to do during their grad school. And if you can collect the evidences you need for like an MSL position, like the master person with master degree in statistics, or the ones you mentioned in your company without a PhD, they would be also competent in the job market to get an MSL position.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have a question. Sure. Since we're covering alternative careers, and now that you are an MSL and have joined an industry, you're exposed to other careers, what other career path have you learned that you didn't know about that now you see are a possibility for someone with an advanced degree, be a PharmD, a PhD, whatever D type of degree?
For me, I wouldn't have been aware of the educational opportunities. I really like to teach, and I thought about going into academia, honestly, after, when I was making these transitions in my career. And I think there are those roles within some of these companies. So I think something like that would be really interesting, and I didn't know it was there before. You have people in developing the training programs for the company. You have people that are getting questions through a call center and are able to formulate answers and provide information through a call center. Something like that would even be interesting. So I didn't know that pharmacists were doing those things before, and other Ds.
I'll get so those are other career paths that now you know about that you can do with an advanced degree. Do you know of any others? Like you mentioned regulatory affairs or the research. You mentioned something else. So do you need advanced degrees for those, or anyone could do that with a master's or bachelor's?
Most of the upper level people in the company that are heads of molecules or heads of like the operation groups do have doctorates. People that are heads of studies are usually some sort of clinical degree. It's usually an MD. I'm trying to think of anyone else. You could definitely go into regulatory affairs if you wanted to with a doctorate for sure, if that was an area of interest. Pharmacovigilance, that would be another option.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, just one more. Just to follow up with his question back there. Out of your experience with the MSLs that did get a postdoc, were the majority of them industry postdocs versus academic postdocs? Would an academic postdoc be considered a disadvantage as opposed to those applying that have industry postdocs?
Everyone I know actually came from academia that has postdoc, at least in my company, you know, and that's just, of course, a small selection of people, but.
Hi, thank you for being here. I only have one question. You said you are at the Houston area. What if you decided, I don't know, you want to move to Chicago? Is it possible to say, okay, I stop what I'm doing in Houston and I get transferred to Chicago and I start there? Is it this possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely possible. It would be more difficult because you wouldn't have those relationships to leverage. You'd be starting from scratch or coming back behind somebody who had left a company and trying to pick up what they were doing. But it'd definitely be possible. If I wanted to move to Chicago, I think I could. And having a couple of years of industry experience under your belt, it's a lot easier to find positions, unfortunately. It's hard to break in. It's a lot easier to switch between companies.
Came in late.
Oh, no
Okay.
problem.
But picking up on this gentleman's question again for the junior scientist, the question that I have is the additional value that a student might obtain by doing a postdoc in terms of their communication skills, and maybe also the fact that they've identified those investigators that could be key opinion leaders. Is that where the value is, or is the value in the conduct of the research that they're doing? And that then may actually address the question of how does a student who knows well in advance that they're interested in this career, whether or not to do that postdoc?
I definitely think, I mean, there's always the benefit of doing the research, but it's like you said, I think that maturity, working longer, getting to know more people and being able to leverage that, all those things help as part of the postdoc process. And if you guys are really interested in hearing about whether or not some of my PhD colleagues think that's useful, I'm happy to try to get that information for you. And I'm sorry that I don't have all of the answers that you guys want, but I'm happy to speak with some of them and see if I can get a little more advice.
Point of view, that if the average salary is $144,000, it's a little unlikely. I'm thinking, that somebody who's coming out with a PhD without any experience beyond that could command that salary. But I may be wrong, but I'm just saying.
There are people who do it. There are people who do it. There's an exception to every rule. Sure. The majority of people have further experience based on that, just based on who I know that's in these roles that has a PhD, the vast majority of them have gone on to do something else. The people I was talking about that have, like the person that has the master's in statistics, Presley has been an MSL for 15 years. So it's a different work environment. It's a different level of competition between people. So I don't know that you could come in with a master's in statistics now. That makes sense. So anything you can do to further your experience and to develop those networks and develop your skills in a working environment would be of benefit, in my opinion.
Okay, now my second question is really what I'm interested in.
Sure.
I was just kind of picking up on that one because I thought it was interesting. Since you're working as an MSL in the Houston area, I think the value that you'll add to the question that I ask is going to be very relevant for somebody like me. Not knowing very much about MSLs, I just kind of got on the websites and, did a little social networking. And interestingly, 90% of the MSL positions that I found in and around the greater Houston area, even as far as north as Dallas, were all in cancer research. And so presumably that's because that's what this area is very well known at. The question I have is, if somebody had an interest in something like infectious disease, something that was not that area, are there regional considerations when one is interested in a career as an MSL? Because just doing the first check, I'm an infectious disease specialist, so I was just curious, where can I find a job as a MSL in infectious disease if I was interested or if I wanted to guide a student that would be interested? And I couldn't find a single one. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't exist, but I think what was at least obvious to me is that there is a significant difference in depending upon which area you're interested in, and some of that's going to be bound geographically. So was that reality or was I missing something?
There are definitely MSLs that are specializing in other areas here, but you are correct. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is that the place a company makes the most money is in oncology and oncology research. So they're going to be putting, and MSLs are a research-based position. You're going to places that are looking to work with molecules. So if the most research is in oncology, then you'll see the most positions for that. There's not as much ongoing research in something like ID. You may also see that, for instance, I have a good friend who's an MSL in solid organ transplant. So he can't stay just in Houston, even though we have a transplant center here. Just to cover multiple institutions, he's having to cover a larger area than just Houston, while in oncology, just Houston is enough for somebody to make a full-time job out of.
I guess going back to their question, would you say or would you agree that sometimes perhaps if you're coming from a PhD background, transitioning towards like a studies coordinator position, regulatory affairs position in certain departments at MD Anderson would also be a good path towards it?
I definitely think there are people that come from that side of things, and it gives you additional knowledge about how clinical trials come about, all the regulatory things that go into them that could be used in this type of position. So any applicable experience helps put you above somebody else.
So you mentioned you didn't get any training from the MSL Society, but I've seen in some places that there's like a certification you can get, or there's like courses you can get in terms of training. And would you say that's required, encouraged? No? Okay.
No. I wouldn't say, like I said, if you were looking for something that you just really wanted to do that would put something on your CV that said, hey, I'm really interested in that, that would be a possibility. But do we look for that when we hire people? No. It's not something that's necessary.
Just from the perspective of the job itself, I kind of wanted to ask a question as to what is it like, say, when you want to take a vacation? And I'm asking kind of, for people who are thinking that research is just such a full-time commitment. I mean, we plan our lives around our experiments rather than the other way around. And so in your reality, what is it like? Because you're dealing with some clinical trials and this and that, are you at liberty to say, well, I have a family reunion that was scheduled and I'm going to go? Or are you tied to, kind of like we are in the lab, to the types of work that we do, time sensitive, all these types of things?
I am not. For the most part, there are a few times where I would not schedule a vacation, like in the middle of ASH, probably wouldn't go over really well. But for the most part, I'm free to come and go as I need to. And I have people that could cover my area if needed. In clinical practice, I didn't have that same freedom. No more than one person could be off at a time, so I found this to be much less restrictive.
Competition within your company between the MSLs, where you feel like you need to be outperforming the other ones? Essentially, what is the work life like for you as part of a team of MSLs? Does that make sense?
So our MSL team is divided into 3 regions, West, Central, and East. I'm on the West team. I would say that my team is completely laid back and everybody takes care of everybody else, and it's not very competitive, while the East team, it's pretty cutthroat over there. So it depends on the team and it depends on the particular company. For the most part, people are super supportive of one another, but I think naturally those of us who've chosen to go into these kinds of fields are competitive people and we're overachievers. So there can be some of that, but I found it to be a very positive work environment. I haven't run into any issue.
I just had a general question. Was there any particular challenge that you faced to make the transition from an academic to industry?
Yeah, that connecting the dots stuff that's been really hard for me. And learning how to just speak about data and not give my opinion, that's really difficult, especially when you're in the kind of role where I was before, where that's all I did is give my opinion all day long, and I'm not allowed to do that. So that part's been a little difficult, and getting used to just being restricted legally.
First off, I just want to say thanks for answering so many questions.
No problem.
My question. My question is motivated by my love for big data and visualizing data, and I'm a traditional wet lab biologist, but I'm interested in knowing if the MSL position has room for visualizing data in new sort of ways. Like, I know you said you can't change the interpretation of the data, you just have to state the facts, but are you able to plot the data in different ways before you show people? Is there freedom to think about what the trends are, or is that someone else's job entirely?
So all of the slides or information that I give people in writing is reviewed by a legal group and another committee before it ever is brought out into the field. So for instance, if I were preparing a presentation that I were giving to a group of physicians, I would have a kind of a library of slides I could choose from, and I could pick, as long as things were balanced and I was including both efficacy and safety information. I could choose what I wanted to present, but do I have the ability to change things up? No.
Okay.
That's part of the restrictions.
Yeah. Who does the generation of the slides then, or the figures?
So there are some MSLs that are doing those things and then taking it through those committees for review.
Okay.
There's also people that are involved in more of an educational or pharmacovigilance kind of role that would make slides and go through those same review committees. But
awesome.
Yeah, I can't go off the rails and talk about whatever I want, but I don't find that to be an issue.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks.
following up on that, the data then are generated by the team that conducted all the, what you get is already the data as it should be presented. In other words, is what you're trying to do, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So you're not at liberty to actually take the raw data and replot it, or
No.
you get it at, this is how you're going to show it. Correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Correct.
So this is a little bit of a tangent, but so in the medical center, you have MSLs from AstraZeneca, Genentech, and your company. Do you ever, is there any, so you already discussed intra, company competition. Is there any competition in terms of, or, okay, better question is, have you ever had to sort of go after the same physician or key opinion leader or key thought leader, like between several companies, and how does that look like? I mean, is it, seriously like a brawl? I mean, because there's competition. It is a business. Yeah. So how do you negotiate that sort of competition?
The brawling is more on the sales side. There is, so obviously, for instance, my company makes a product that there are several other people in the market, and the MSL for X company might come in and say, well, have you seen the data for Exazimib? This and this and this is true, and this is why my drug is better. So I might have to come and do damage control afterwards, maybe a little bit. But do I have any direct competition with those people? Not really. And again, it's not my job to sell anything. I'm really just wanting to understand why that physician, what they took away from that conversation, and is it going to change their practice, and is there something that my company can provide to help change their mind? So not a lot of brawling. Most of them were pretty friendly.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the talk. I just want to know if you had some training before you start with MSL, or if you're having training on a regular basis, for example, every 2 to 3 months, or do you have a person you can ask, like a mentor, or?
Sure.
Yeah. Thank
you.
So
when I started, I had a good month and a half of modules to go through. Training me on what is industry, what is my job, what is Takeda, disease state modules for multiple myeloma, going through all the major publications for Exazimib, going through all the major publications for the drug before that.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for
there was a huge educational piece, and then I had a trainer who was responsible for assigning me readings and programs, and I had 2 mentors. After that, because we were preparing for a product launch, we had a lot of training, and even now, there's something at least on a weekly basis, whether or not that's about a disease state or a drug or a new trial that we're expecting to get data from. Also, I think over time you kind of develop your own mentors within the team. So there are people that if I'm not sure what to do, I give them a call, and they help guide me through it. And I think I mentioned earlier, the person who was in my territory before me kind of pieced out like 2 months in to me starting the job. So I had a lot of people that I would call them and be like, I just don't even know where to start with this. And I felt very supported, even though no one was always physically there with me.
So, sorry, going back to like the interview process and things, I just was curious, since a lot of graduate students, postdocs, where our work is very centered on publications, whether it's drug mechanism or, mechanisms in disease in general, do publications matter if you're going for an MSL job? Like, do they look at publications, or is that just kind of something that's a little different?
I don't think they hurt. It's definitely demonstrating that you're able to communicate scientific information. So I would think that if you had a PhD background, it would be great to have some publications put on your CV.
Okay, I'll throw another one out there. Keep momentum going. Is there anything you dislike about MSL? Not to say that it would be something that turns you away from it, just say, well, this part of it I don't really like, but overall it's great.
Let's see. I think I have, so in my job, I have lost some control over what happens in that if somebody doesn't want to meet with me, I can't force them to. If somebody wants to get on Twitter and go on a rampage against my drug, I can't do anything about that. But it might be, somebody might call me and say, hey, what's going on with so-and-so? Why are they on Twitter? And those things might stress me out, but I don't have any control over them. That gets a little frustrating because I think in my role before I had, if I did X, Y would happen. And it's not that way at this position. I also think that, before I was in a position where I talked to people all day long and I was around people all day long. So it's a little different to get used to being essentially on your own all the time. So it's not that I dislike that, but sometimes it's a little lonely to be at your house, to not have anywhere to, go and work. It's just different.
So we keep talking about CVs. For MSL positions, is it better to have a resume or a CV?
A CV, definitely. Yeah, they're going to want more extensive information.
I want to know, how often do you travel?
It depends on the time of year. As I mentioned, my area is just Houston, so it's not part of my day-to-day activities, but I go to a lot of conferences. I'm probably gone once a month in the spring. The summer gets a little bit quieter, and then it picks back up in September. There's a lot of conferences and meetings, so I'm gone probably twice a month from September to mid-December.
You shared with me before, and I would like you to share with them. When you go to a conference, like because as a graduate student, I went to a conference and it was a fun, you meet with your friends, you go to a poster session, to the drinking sessions afterwards. But it sounds like for you as an MSL, that's a very different experience. So can you share with them what to expect once they go to those conferences?
Sure. So for instance, if I go to ASH, every time you go downstairs in the hotel, you're on. Because you could run into your investigator and they're going to want to talk about their protocol. So there's not a lot of downtime unless you're hiding in your room. Also, you'll be assigned either presentations or posters that you will visit, and then you have to write reports on for the company. You will usually have time standing at a booth answering questions. You'll be expected to maybe do the company might have some sponsor talks afterwards. I can very easily end up working a 14-hour day during a conference. It's not fun. It's a long day. But, I make up for that on other days. But yeah, that was my experience too before. I would go to, ASBMT and just run around with my friends and, see a poster and then leave. And it doesn't work that way anymore.
So is that possible that one with MSL job get back to research after a while, like 2, 3, 4 years?
I guess you probably could, but yeah, I think you could if you wanted to. I don't see why you couldn't. It would just be explaining why you left and wanted to come back. Same with me. If I wanted to go back into clinical practice, I would have to explain, what I was doing and why it was still applicable. But I think you'd have that ability if you didn't like it.
I bet somebody asked this question, but I'm going to ask it again. Did you probably don't? Did oh, it's actually already on. It's probably on. Did you address which is the most likely matriculation from a PhD, a PharmD, or an MD?
I didn't. It depends on the company. My team at Takeda is pretty overwhelmingly PharmD, but we just bought out a company that everybody on the team was PhD except for one. So it depends on the company, who they like to hire. A lot of times the director for the team, if they're a PhD, they tend to like to hire PhDs. If they're a PharmD, they tend to like to find other clinical people. But it's actually nice to have a balance between different disciplines, because the PhDs have skills I don't have, and I have skills they don't have, and we can all share and teach each other.
So we'll take two or three more questions, and then we'll let Sarah maybe do, if she'll stay around for a few one-on-one questions. But
Thank you. So you spend sometimes traveling to conferences, sometimes traveling to meetings, and then you spend a lot of time presumably at physicians' offices and doing sort of out-of-the-home things around your territory area. What are the kinds of things that you're doing when you're actually working from home?
Like I mentioned, a lot of the trainings and meetings are via WebEx. So I'm at home, but I'm still at a meeting. I might be reading publications. I think I mentioned that when I have a concept come in from investigator, I'm responsible for presenting that to the company. So maybe I'm preparing those slides, educating myself, trying to keep up with what's going on. I try to read through tables of contents for New England Journal and JCO to look for things that my investigators are doing, so I can talk to them about that the next time I see them. Things along those lines. Thank you.
Hi. So what would you say is more important? Is it having a knowledge of a particular disease or a pathway, or having access to a network that you can leverage, like when you're getting recruited, and how does it change maybe 5 years down the line?
How does it change 5 years down the line? You mean within an MSL role?
Yeah, within an MSL role.
Well, that's a hard question to answer. It depends on who was hiring. I think both of them are probably equally important. It just depends on the role that they're looking to fill. Network probably slightly edges out the disease and pathway. But again, it depends. 5 years down the road, once you have experience, it doesn't matter as much. And you're not going to be able to leverage the same network, because most companies are going to make you sign a non-compete agreement, so you're not going to be able to visit that same network anyway.
How long is that non-compete agreement for? Is it just for once you get out, do you have a certain amount of time that you cannot reach out to those groups, or is it always? Forever?
It's not always.
Oh, okay.
They can't, yeah, it's not always.
Right.
It depends on the company. It's usually a year or two.
Oh. Any final questions? No? All right. So I'll hand it over to you.
I have a little something from us, plus I also have some books to raffle. Do you want to follow me?